Hey, amigas. Think about the future for a moment. Maybe a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. When you think about that future, what feelings come up? Are you hopeful? Are you an optimist? Are you a doomsdayer? Um, for me, I would say as a mom in particular, I feel some anxiety about the future. I wonder about climate change. I wonder about global politics. I wonder about AI. And I wish that I could think about the future in more positive terms. But if I'm honest, I am a little concerned. And so it was really interesting to talk to Florence, who is an amiga. She's been on quite a few retreats. And she also happens to work at the UN and has written a couple of books on approaching the future, thinking about the future. She identifies as a futurist and an optimist at the same time. And I was really interested in how she does that. How does she think about the future? What does she think about climate change and AI and global politics and women's rights and all of these big questions that I think if you do your daily Instagram scroll can feel a little bit negative. And actually, my favorite part of our conversation, other than her optimist spin on those topics, was actually at the very end when we started talking about the idea that is out there that we should just really focus on living in the present and like don't worry about the future or don't think about the future. And she had a very interesting take on that still has me pondering. So I hope that you'll enjoy it and feel more positive about the future as I did after this conversation. You've already sort of answered the question, where are you in the world and did you surf today? Because I can see that you said you're in Bavaria and I can tell you didn't surf today.
I did not surf today. I am in Bavaria. It's mega wintry here. I went for a walk in the snow and I saw a little creek. So I saw some water, but zero chance of surfing in that.
Yeah. And is that where you live or you're just there for
No,
uh,
I'm here with my sister at the moment. It's like a mountain retreat here. I live in Rome. I live in Italy.
okay. Well, thanks for taking a break from your mountain retreat to connect with us.
Now, of course, for you, anything, Holly.
Oh. So I want to I guess start with how you got into surfing and like a little bit about where you're from and how you got into surfing.
Yeah. So the original surf story, I grew up in Munich, and Munich isn't by the ocean, it's in Bavaria, but it has a little surfer scene. You might have heard that it has an artificial little wave in the English Garden, which wasn't actually built for surfing. When the English Garden was built in the 18th, 19th century, they did that just because it looked cute to have a little wave there. And then in the 1970s, boys started surfing it. Basically, it's just standing on that wave. So you have a little bit of a surfer scene. When I was a teenager in the 90s, all my friends, the male friends, they would go surfing, and either there or they would take their boards and go to the south of France for surfing. None of the girls were surfing. So the girls were just sitting at the beach looking at the boys. And I secretly always wanted to be in the water. But, it was a very intimidating environment. But of course, at the back of my head, I thought I want to try surfing one day. And then when I turned 35, I had just been through a breakup. My sister and I, we went to Morocco to a surf camp there, and we decided, let's give it a go. So that's how it started. But really, the idea I want to give this a try started when I was a teenager.
I can't believe that they built a standing wave just because it looked cute. Like that's
Yes, that is
amazing.
such a 19th century idea, right? But but there was a bit of drama now because their safety concerns, and because it was never built for that. But yeah, it is one of the key attractions today. People come to Munich and just watch people surf that wave.
And so interesting that they would have like had the idea to build it without the intention of it being surfable and then having done it in a way that is now surfable. It's just that's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. But I have a even better story for you, which is last year when we were surfing in Pavones. One morning I was working on my book, and then the girls came back from the surf and they said, "Hey, we met this old guy from Munich in the water. Maybe you know him." I was like, "Well, probably not." But then we went out in the afternoon, and so I saw him there. And it turns out he was one of the original surfers on that little wave. And he's now in his 70s. And he said, well, originally we just took a piece of board and just tied a rope to the trees to see if it's actually doable. And that's how it all started. So I come across him in Costa Rica, of all places.
That's crazy. I love that. What a pioneer.
Yes.
Um, so yes, writing a book while on a retreat. Now that is some serious multitasking because I know for me, my brain works in different ways when I'm in the retreat space, and I can't imagine how easy it would have been for you to do that. But have you finished the book now?
I have finished it and it's a bestseller in Germany. It's now 12 weeks on the bestseller list. It's about geopolitics. I work in geopolitics. But I find the combination of nature and sports with writing works really well for me. Because it's, I mean, you shouldn't do either all day long. I think it's the combination that works super well for me.
Okay. Well, I mean, I can imagine. What is it about the combination, do you think, that works for you?
I think both require levels of concentration that are mutually reinforcing. So, in the water, you're completely with the ocean and with your physical abilities. So it's all, inside and out, but your brain, like your rational mind plays zero role in the water. And when I'm writing, then I come out of the water. Best is surfing in the morning and then writing, not the other way around. Because then I'm very calm and then I can completely concentrate on just having thoughts, big thoughts.
Can you talk a little bit about what your book is about? What are these big thoughts that you're able to put on the page?
So, I like to, I work for NATO, but I'm a futurist. So I think about the future all the time. Which ways can things go both good and bad? And, I work for NATO now, but I also think about the future of health and climate and relations and anything that concerns humanity in the future. And so for that, obviously, you have to be able to zoom out of the present and go quite into a different space. And that's why I think also that's the kind of thought that human brains are really good for. I don't think we're doing ourselves a favor in using that capacity to, worry about whether my luggage is too heavy or will I actually make it to that train? Well, if you don't, you get the next one. I think you can use your brain power for really marvelous things. And traveling to the future is actually a human superpower. We're pretty much the only species that can do it in such detail, but then you have to put it to good use, I think, also.
Wow. Okay. So I feel like I could ask you so many different questions in which direction we want to go in. Like, not wanting to get too far into politics, but it's got to be a crazy time to be working at NATO right now. Like, it
Oh,
seems
yeah.
like things
Yeah.
shifting pretty radically. And in what capacity do you work at NATO?
So I run the research division at NATO Defense College. So as the name suggests, it's a college. So we're an education institution. Our students are officers in their 50s, late 40s, early 50s. They come to us before they go and work somewhere in NATO or in a member state capacity in a defense ministry or something. And of course, they come from all over NATO. So you have Americans, you have Germans, you have Poles, you have everything. And of course, we think a lot about what can go wrong, especially with Russia, but then also China, AI, et cetera, et cetera. So it can be a pretty dark subject matter, which is why you really need to balance things out. I think mental health is super important for people working in this field. But then, of course, you've seen the news. There's a lot of uncertainty also within NATO. And because we're talking about surfing, I think surfing actually is a very good metaphor. And we know that surfing is a metaphor for life, but I think you develop such mental resilience because of it. That's super useful also when you work in a high stress environment like myself, because you learn, okay, you just have to hang in there and it's gonna pass and something else will happen, and just have all your options on the table. So I think mental health in general is underappreciated. Cognitive strength is underappreciated. It's not, surfing isn't just a hobby. I mean, it's a great hobby, but it also helps me at least to hone, these capacities to also stop, just stop thinking about this now, focus on something else, come back to it when you're ready again. So that's super useful right now.
At what point in your surfing career did you start like making those connections? I mean, like the metaphors that you're talking about, I can totally agree with. There's always another wave
Yeah.
coming, like you gotta, the section closes out, like you can't hit pause, you just have to hold on and see what happens. But like you're not somebody that surfs, every day or has been doing
No.
it since you were really young. So when you were wanting to get into surfing, and like at what point did you kind of realize the benefits to your life?
So, there's two lives. I have two surfing lives in that sense. I started when I was 35, but then I wasn't really committed. I thought it's just a sport, it's a hobby. I'm just going to do it, in the summer or whatever. And then that about after 4 years into this, I thought I'm just not good at this. I'm just not making progress. And maybe it's just time to give up. And then the story, I met this girl, Debbie, in Portugal, and she said, "No, you don't suck. You just need to get into a proper surf coaching." And she recommended Surf with Amigas. That's how you and I crossed paths. That's where the actual surfing began, because that's when I began to discover this entire universe that comes along with surfing. That it's actually not just a sport. That if you want to get better at it, you have to commit to it and keep showing up. And then that's when I made that pact with myself. And the pact was, I'm going to dedicate 100 hours in the water. All I need to do is keep showing up. And if after 100 hours I don't want to keep going, I can stop. But I want to keep doing that. And then, of course, once I got to 100, I was already so much better simply because I had committed to it. And I think that's sticking it out, maybe it's not the right term, but keep showing up for something, realize that really great things come from commitment and from long-term investment. And, when I'm writing books, it's exactly like surfing. It can be really hard. It's a long journey to really get good at it, but eventually you get there. I mean, it does pay off, but there's also lots of sucky moments in it. I think I started understanding that from, around the time you and I met. So 2019, so in the second half. And then I became serious about surfing. And then I also saw, and then you know how you can also tell that surfing has these impacts on your other parts of your life, that you sit in a meeting and things get tough and then suddenly you remember a scene in the ocean. And so your brain is actually building these analogies itself. It recognizes there are patterns here that are identical. And then you know what to do.
Wow, I love that. I don't know that I've ever had that experience, but I think that maybe because surfing is like the biggest part of my life, that it's hard to imagine it like popping in that way. So it's so interesting to hear you describe it. Well,
Yeah.
so what should the futurist, like your job or your specialty is like looking at the future and trying to, it sounds like trying to kind of prepare people to meet the challenges of the future and balancing positive visions of the future with negative visions of the future.
Yeah.
And do you sometimes struggle to see a positive vision of the future, or do you trend in that direction?
So I'm a stoic. So I think even when I can't necessarily see rainbows and butterflies, I always think, well, there's something good somewhere always. And so one of the things I do, actually, it's a nice thing to recommend also to you or to our listeners, is at night when I'm in bed, just before I fall asleep, I have to pick three things in this day that I liked. And it can be literally anything. It can be a butterfly, it can be a compliment, it can be a nice cup of coffee, it can be whatever. It's not even gratitude. You don't even have to go that far. But just pick three things that you liked. And then you realize there's always something that you will like. Now, that doesn't mean that the big problems won't go away, etc. But you will always be able to redirect your attention to something that's positive. And I think that's helpful. Um, and then, of course, because I work for basically an international organization, so government, our job is to find pathways to something that's better. And that's why I can never stop at a negative future and go, you know what, we're just toast. It's never going to be good again. That's not my job, right? My job is to say, well, this and this and this and this is no longer on in the cards, but we can still find this, or we could try this, right? So, and I think that's the important thing. It's not just about thinking about the future. It's coming up with pathways that you want to that you walk down on. So you have to end in an action. Thinking about the future always has to lead to action. If it doesn't, then you haven't really brought the thought to an end. Because at the end of the day, what is the future? It's a feeling, it's a thought in the present that helps you take decisions in the present. And that's what you should be doing. And when you act, then you also automatically feel more optimistic.
Okay, if I was going to take your advice and say, okay, what kind of when I think about the future, then it's got to end in an action. Like what how long in the future are we talking about, or does it matter?
So it's really up to you. So I'll give you one example. I give you first an example when it's difficult. For instance, the other day I had a stressful situation in the workplace, and then I read an email on the way home, and then I was like, okay, there's nothing I can do about it today. So a little trick you can do is you write it down. You write down, I will think about this tomorrow morning. And then you just put it aside. That's an action. You didn't because you decided this is a discussion for tomorrow morning. So that works when nothing else works. But let's say, for instance, you want to grow as a business and you want to open another retreat site. And then you have, I don't know, you have a vision, but then you have to come back to the present and say, okay, what's the next step we're going to do? We go explore a new site in whatever, Ireland or whatever you have in mind. So that's what I mean. I mean, that's actually makes sense that you end up not just having a vision board, but then coming up with ideas of how you're going to implement it. Um, but then I always have to tell you this. I feel like nothing related to the future works when it comes to love, right? Because people often ask, can you actually apply strategic foresight to romantic relationships? Can you have a plan for a scenario for where your relationship? Like I have this friend of mine, he's going through a terrible crisis in his relationship, and he said, "Can we write scenarios about where this is going to go?" And I said, I think that's where my wisdom ends, because I have a feeling that the more human it is, the more emotional it is. You just have to embrace the messiness of it. There's no toolbox that can get you through it. And that's also what you learn in surfing. That's like, you will not be able to control everything. There's no chance. You just have to embrace what happens.
Yeah, I think that's interesting to think about. Um, I guess when I think about like the future and like maybe the things that you do, there's like these big things in the future that feel so negative, or they could feel really negative. Talk about like
Yeah.
climate change or, resource depletion or like the current like global trend towards authoritarianism and like all of these things that feel like so big. But like, if we're going to talk about, let's like bring them to like surfing. So I would say like for me personally, for Surf with Amigas, like one of the things that we deal with is like crowding, like Surf with Amigas started, 15 years ago, when the whole idea of like the surf retreat was newer and like the places that we were going to were a little more off the beaten path. And so we didn't have to deal with like a lot of crowds, whether it be local surfers or expats or other surf camps. And then, depending on the location I'm talking about, there's like a little bit of a different situation. But if I think about our two like home locations, like now there's more and more and more expats. There's more local surfing. There's more surf camps, which you can't blame them. They're doing the same thing I am. It's not like, oh, I got there first, so I can do this and you can't. Like everybody has the right to do their thing, but it does create a problem. And that's one of those things where it's like, what do you do? And then you could kind of think about it if it was like climate change or whatever else. Like there's those little things that I could do maybe to adjust like my emotions about it or my thought process about it, or I can pick up like one piece of trash or whatever. But it feels like there's not a lot you can do. So how do you think
Yeah.
positively about things like that?
So one of the things that's important when we think about the future is to recognize where is your room for maneuvering, because you do not control the future. I mean, you can control certain things, but you cannot control that other people are coming. You cannot control the weather. There's plenty. So of course, when we think about the future, we have to focus on those areas that we can control. Now, you said whatever we cannot control, maybe you can change your attitude, or maybe you can just accept it will always bug you. That's also an option. But then focus on focus on the things that you can influence. Now, and then of course explore what are other options. In this case, like in your case, I would say, okay, let's find out What are other options? Is there other options either with the retreats that are coming? Are there other sites that are possible for you? Perhaps other seasons? I don't know. This you know better, but think it would actually be helpful to sit down and have like a structured process where you gather a team, because it's always in a team. Whenever we think about the future, it should be done with other people. Ideally, people that are completely different from us, because they bring mega different perspectives. So the more diverse a team is, the better they are actually at guessing the future, so to speak. Um, and then figure out, things that we control, things that we don't control, things that we control. What can we do here? What are areas we can explore? I think, and then last resort, be stoic about the things that you really cannot change. When it comes to climate change, there is, for instance, one book I recommend, Not the End of the World by Hannah Ritchie. It's a book that really looks at what's actually still possible and feasible in terms of climate change. And actually, as the name indicates, there's still reason for hope. And it's not like we're too late and we're never going to be able to fix it. We might not be able to fix everything, but I think there are certain things that we can fix. And then when it comes to geopolitics, my greatest source of solace is actually history. Because when you look at all the things that our ancestors have gone through, be it, political turmoil, I mean, in your and my lifetime alone, things like how legislation has changed for when it comes to women's rights or democracy in general, etc. I think, well, it's certainly not great. I wish things were better in many ways, but I also think it's way too soon to throw in the gun and say, everything's over. And of course, democracy is never a one system. You have to fight for it. Every generation has to fight for it. I think that's the hard insight. We thought it's a given and we could just live happily, but actually every generation has to earn the right to have the system.
Yeah, I think that whole idea of like looking at history could be taken in like the positive or the negative. Like I think
Yeah.
there's also that like thought of like, oh, like the World War or like these
Yeah.
horrible things that happened in the past is in the past. Like that's not going to happen again.
Yeah.
Especially I think as Americans, like you think that, oh, like the dictator thing, like that happens in other places. Like
Yeah.
that doesn't happen to us. And so there is that, like, okay, I look at history and I know that it does this, it goes up and down, and
It
then
does. Yeah,
it's just,
unfortunately, I mean, Fukuyama and the end of history and this idea that we had everything and from now on it's going to be smooth sailing. Unfortunately, that's not how human history works, but it also means we still have a lot of agency. And then also, the news are by definition negative. It's not against journalists, it's just how the mind also works. Our brain is more wired to give negativity attention. But for instance, in Italy, where I live, just 2 or 3 weeks ago, the parliament accepted, like, not a single voice was against it, a new law that defines rape as the absence of consent. Right. And, Meloni is a right-wing conservative prime minister. This is not a government that's known to be super liberal or whatever, but not a single member of parliament voted against that. And it just shows you, well, we're continuing to make progress. It's not like women's rights are being trampled everywhere. It's just maybe the good news don't always get so much attention.
yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I talk about that even in relation to surfing and to the experiences and the things that we pay attention to. I mean, yes, of course, people are going to remember that like amazing wave that they got, like the thing that's super good, you're going to notice and you're going to hear
Yeah.
about, and the thing that's really bad, you're going to notice and you're going to hear about. But all of the times that just paddled out and did a mellow turtle roll and came back up and kept going, like those little micro successes get forgotten or not celebrated.
Yes, very, very true.
So how did you learn how to be a futurist? Is that like a college course that you took, or were you always that way? Were you always like thinking about the future in a positive way since you were young?
So I read, and I can confirm that it's true for my family, is that to be an optimist, it's not like you're necessarily born with that attitude, but if people that are more optimistic or more can do about the future tend to come from families where the parents did not accept the status quo. So believe in upward mobility, for instance, or just question the status quo. Now, you're American. In the US, that's culturally much more common. Then, for instance, in Europe, it depends on the country. I would say about half Germans are more can do, the other half are more fatalistic. Like they believe more, well, my fate is more like a given and there's not so much I can do. And so definitely my family was very much of the conviction, both sides, my mom and my dad families, that you can change your fate and yet you can actually, yeah, create a life as you want it. And then it helps to have siblings because siblings create a bit of competition, and when you're in competition, you actually discover your own agency. So you discover actually, I mean, siblings can be super annoying, but 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 you discover what you're good at and also your limits. And I think that's important in being optimistic. Now, I studied political science. I didn't study, strategic foresight or whatever. You can study it, but the vast majority of people that end up in this field end up there because they're just interested in patterns of change, how to deal with surprise. They're generally more interested in fixing problems than in admiring them. So, I studied out as a Middle East analyst. I was working on a lot of countries and a lot of trouble, in the Arab Spring. And then progressively, I was working at the European Union at the time. I started looking at other areas of the future, and I discovered this whole universe, and I found it intellectually super interesting and also very rewarding because you keep learning, right? History progresses all the time. There's innovation going on. There's everywhere on the planet, there are people working on solutions. And once you discover that, it just feels so much better than thinking, I think everything's over.
Yeah, no, I love the idea of focusing on the solutions that are out there. And I do also think that, like, going back to what we said about the media, that the solutions aren't what's getting covered. The coverage is
Mm.
all on the problem. So I think that it can be hard, as especially in the social media world of like scrolling, that like, every now and then maybe like I've seen like some story of like some 19-year-old that devised a machine that can gobble up trash in the ocean, or something like that. But I feel like they're these like weird, like one-off sensational things, but it doesn't feel practical. It doesn't actually
Yeah.
feel like there's solutions that are going to make any amount of difference.
Yeah, but there are solutions everywhere all the time. And so I was just at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And, for instance, I went to this one panel where they were talking about the future of cancer care. And you realize that we're so close to so many solutions for so many people when it comes to cancer. And that's really amazing. Or, Alzheimer's and all the problems that our ancestors or, our parents had that we will probably not have in the same way. So there's plenty of innovation going on, and yeah, I think it deserves more attention. And that's also a task for everybody, right? So we have a choice where we scroll and what we look at. We can control it much more than in the old days when you just picked up a newspaper and you just read whatever was in it. On Instagram, you can choose, there's platforms like Global Positive News or Positive News, or there's plenty where you can actually feed your mind also with some positive stories.
Well, that's good to know. You have to make a list of those things to adjust. So when you look at the future with AI, like how does that? I mean, that again feels like this big unknown. I'm really interested in like tech reporting and like listen to
Hmm.
tech podcasts just because I think it's fascinating. And it does seem like there's this camp that's like, AI is there's like a growing risk that they're going to exterminate us all, and then there's other people that are like, no, but that's overblown and this and that. Like, what do you think, or do you even focus on technology at all when you're thinking about the future?
Yeah, no, I have to. Technology is, of course, one of the forefronts for all things future. So I think AI, the comparison that I find the most fitting is electricity. So when electricity was invented, first of all, people are always scared when there's an innovation. Like you're laughing today about, when they invented the rocking chair, people thought, oh my God, people are gonna go crazy about that. So electricity, in the same way, people thought this is mega dangerous. And of course, the answer is, well, it depends what you use it for. And the answer is the same for AI. So of course, there is a huge positive potential when it comes to instance to healthcare, because AI AI in cooperation with humans is pretty good, better than humans at detecting, for instance, on scans, cancer, for instance. It can be a fun tool to play with. It makes a lot of my life, for instance, easier visualizing publications, etc. Of course, there are limits, and I think I live in Europe, so Europe loves to regulate. We don't want the use of AI in military decision making. We don't want an AI to decide whether people should live or die. But to me, that's a regulation problem more than a technology runaway, because we have a choice here. We just need to put the limits so that it can't go there. Now, in terms of actually like a super AI, the one, that where people are afraid that it might actually kill us or whatever, I think we're still decades away from that, because ChatGPT, the generative AI and so forth, it doesn't have that power yet. But of course, yeah, long term, in 30 to 50 years, there is a possibility, but we have a choice to regulate. And that's precisely why people are so afraid, or actually are talking about it. And you have all the science fiction, every other science fiction film is about a robot controlling the world, which clearly shows, well, now we know what we don't want, so let's take the necessary decisions. At least in Europe, there's been several decisions in that direction taken already, that you cannot use AI, for instance, in internal security, policing, and so forth. But of course, people worry, what about Russia? What about China? What about other countries in the
What about
world? Well,
America?
what about America? Can you please not do that either? That would be my my call to you.
Right. And that's where you wonder like what, because it almost feels like, well, if they're not going to put the protections on there, then are we going to be at a disadvantage if we have these protections?
So this is the argument, right? Because in the same way that AI feeds off data, and of course in China there is no such thing as data protection. Of course in Europe we're in the other direction, is almost too much data protection. You have to find the sweet spot in between. But yeah, the worry is that other states that allow everything will make much faster progress. So I think the art of politics is to find the sweet spot between the two. And I'm glad I don't have to make that decision, but I think as per usual, it's okay to take a bit of risk as long as not lives are involved, and then regulate later.
So, as you look at the future and try to find the positive, like where are the areas where you maybe feel like it's harder to find the positives, and where are the area where the positives are actually easier and maybe people just don't realize that it actually looks better than most people think?
So I think let's start with the easier one, the positive one. I think what I just said, healthcare is going to make so much progress in the coming years. You already see the trend to longevity. People laugh about these tracking devices, but actually, thanks to these tracking devices, people understand their body now so much better. The other day, I heard somebody say most people understand their iPhone better than their own body. So, it's really changing that people feel about their body and all that. So I think there's a lot of progress there. I think when it comes to climate change, it's not a one battle, but I'm still pretty optimistic that people understand what there is to be done. And of course, everybody's hoping for technological breakthrough, carbon capture, and all that. So I think the pressure needs to be held up so that nobody drops the ball. But I think climate change, we're on the right track.
Well,
Really,
I
where
just want to pause you real quick there because, like, I guess that surprises me because I feel like to me, it seems like, okay, the recycling thing is a hoax. Like, is stuff really, you put the recycling in the bin and you feel like you're doing the right thing, but like, is it really?
yeah,
And for all of the, yes, there's fewer plastic bags. I go to the grocery store here in Costa Rica and like, you can't even, they don't have plastic bags, which is great.
great, yeah,
But like, it just feels like those little micro changes, like while they make a difference, like the bigger problem is at a
yeah,
system level, and I don't really see change happening
exactly.
there.
So when I say right track, doesn't mean uh, we have all the solutions. So when you have a problem, first of all, you need to understand that you have a problem. Then you need to figure out how to solve the problem, and then you need to solve the problem. So it's these three steps. We're at step two. So at least we've understood now we had a problem. Remember, a lot of people didn't even think we had a problem 30 years ago. And now we understand what the solution is. and we're beginning to implement the solutions, but we haven't done it everywhere yet. And that's what I say by that's what I mean when I say we need to put more pressure. We continue keeping the pressure, but China is now has reached its peak in terms of CO2 emissions. From now on, it's going to decline in terms of emissions. You have in terms of commitment. As I said, we're not where we want to be, but we're also, when the first IPCC report came out, the first report by the International Panel on Climate Change, they thought we were going to reach 3 to 5 degrees over pre-industrial temperature, and now, sorry, not 7, and now we're on track to 3. So that's still not 2. We want 2 or less, but it also shows that we actually have the capacity to reduce. We just need to keep up the pressure. That's what I mean by we're on the right track, but we cannot let go. So I think that's the frustration, and it's so tiring because people feel like, okay, it's been years of us saying this needs to change, and it's changing, but it's slow, and we cannot let go yet. So, but of course, it's the battle of the century. If we don't get this right, we can forget everything else.
Okay.
Um,
Thank you.
but yeah, of course, you're right. Unfortunately, these small gestures that we're making, if they make you feel better, that's good. But of course, the bigger ticket is things like mobility. Can you get people to actually stop using fuel powered cars? Can you get everybody get electric, et cetera, et cetera? This is much more impactful than actually, not having a plastic bag. But not having a plastic bag is still good. I mean, you should still do that. Um, I think what really worries me at the moment is, of course, geopolitics, because you have these tensions, and where there's a lot of tension, things could go really wrong. Of course, war is always a low probability scenario, but when it does happen, it's pretty existential. So we need to absolutely avoid that. We have several flashpoints on the planet, of course, in Europe, but of course also in the Indo-Pacific, China, US, et cetera, et cetera. And there, the answer is it's always diplomacy. Everybody needs to invest in diplomacy. We talk a lot about military defense, but actually, we have to invest at least as much in diplomacy, because it's about talking to each other and figuring out how can you solve a conflict without it turning violent. And that is much more tricky than people realize, because that's actually, there's a reason it's called international relations, because it's not a science. It's actually human beings with all their emotions and all their biases and all their culture come into a room, and things can go wrong for really human reasons. And that's of course the field that I work in, but it's, I think, also the one that will impact everything else, because, should it come to a major conflict anywhere in the world, it will set everybody back on all these other fronts. So I don't want you to get scared, because I don't think that's the likeliest scenario, but it also, like with climate change, is a field where we need to keep up the pressure precisely so it doesn't happen. And a lot of it is actually happening behind the scenes. So people don't always notice that. You will remember when President Trump talked about Greenland, and then he came to Davos and suddenly he backed down. Well, that didn't happen out of the blue. It happened because behind the scenes, so much diplomacy was at work. And I think these people don't necessarily get all the credit that they deserve, but they worked really hard to prevent precisely such a scenario.
So as you're, working as a in a teaching capacity, or, influencing these people who are coming for your advice, like, I'm sure there's like a ton of little details, but to give like the overarching like lessons, like what are people being taught in order to, I mean, are they getting like counseling, like understanding emotions and like communication strategies, or
So unfortunately, this is it's in the infancy, but we have a new fancy word for it now. It's called cognitive warfare. So that's it's bigger than propaganda or information warfare, because cognitive warfare means that somebody is trying to influence your feelings, your attitudes, your decisions, and of course by manipulating your worldview and all that. So um, there's a much broader understanding of what this means. And what I like about it is it sounds fancy, but cognitive means now we can actually also start talking about mental health, about, people making decisions under stress, how people handle emotions. And when I say people, I deliberately use the word people, because it's not just officers or, diplomats. It's also people like you and I, people just scroll on their phones, because it also concerns them. So we're just at the beginning of it, understanding how can we help people maneuver that better. We talk about culture and how different cultures, frame problems or communicate, but we're not really yet at the level where we also talk about cognitive cognitive health, mental health, and all that. So that's just beginning. What they mostly learn is things like, strategy, international relations, understand, the history of certain conflicts. Of course, they also look at different regions in the world, what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in Africa, what's going on in Asia. Gives them in 5 months, they get a pretty big, 360-degree view of what's going on in the world and what will matter to them wherever they go in their next job. I wish, as I said, it's getting better, but I wish that they would all understand much more this huge connection between mind, body, which means, it's not just about brain, it's also about, we now know we did a test once. I mean, this was all voluntary. People were wearing a stress test sensor during a war game, and then could see that people that were sleep deprived were also not taking the best decisions for themselves necessarily. So I always think the 21st century means you have to be as adult as never before. Adult in the sense of taking care of yourself. What do you eat? Do you work out? What do you feed your mind with? Who do you surround yourself with? These are all parts of a good life, so to speak, but they literally can have huge impacts if you sit in the White House or in another really important office, and I wish people would pay more attention to that.
And does that go against the general culture of that job? Because I don't actually know, but it seems like that kind of high stress job would be like hustle culture, like, how can you function on no sleep and going out and like, drinking in order to like make connections and form relationships. Like it seems like it would be a really hard sell to tell these people, and you need to exercise and you need to get more sleep and maybe like less alcohol or whatever the thing is that would like encourage them to take care of their mental health.
Yeah, so unfortunately, you're right. We're up against a culture that is, yeah, hustle culture. It's also male dominated. I think there is a shift, absolutely, especially, you know, because we know since Vietnam actually that there is a thing called post-traumatic stress and so forth. So I think there is a shift, but it's still very early. And that's why I'm happy about the arrival of this new term, cognitive warfare, because now you can tell them, well, actually, now your mind is actually a battlefield, and you need to take care of that. But it's also part of the reason why I, for instance, talk occasionally also about surfing or my workout culture, because I think people need to understand that it's not just something I also do. It's part and parcel of me being good at my job, or actually not just being good at my job, but actually me being a fully functioning human being means that you have to have everything in balance. And so, NATO means that you can also go to the gym during work hours. Nobody thinks that's weird. It's actually encouraged. But you'd be surprised, not everybody goes to the gym, even though, it's kind of a normal thing. Let alone talk about, mental issues. It's beginning to change. We're now having also seminars for leadership about, psychological safety in the workplace, how to give feedback, how to manage conflict. So the shift is there, but yeah, it's slow. It will take, I think, several years before we have it as the norm.
Well, that's good though. I mean, there is something very positive
Yeah,
about the
exactly.
future that,
Exactly.
that feels good. Because it is like so interesting. Like I feel like those are the types of things that should be taught, in
Yeah,
school.
in
Like
school. Absolutely.
these are the ways that we make more, happier, healthier, more productive humans.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And when I joined NATO, I mean, I started my work career in NATO, then I was at the EU, and then I came back. So when I just came back 3 years ago, there was a mandatory online course I had to take, something about for managers, because I manage a team of people. And I can probably only remember one thing, but that was so impactful. And the sentence was, never forget that your physical and emotional status or state will have a direct impact on your team. So if you're not well, your team will not be well either. And that's literally, if that's the only thing that stuck with me, that's at least worth something. Because when I get up in the morning and I realize I'm not well, I'm not in a good mood, either I just don't go to work, or I go home early, or I just take extra care of not, just letting it out on them. And I think, you know, 10, 15 years ago, NATO would never have thought about, does Florence's mood affect her team? Does it affect people working with her?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's so true. And I think that all of us can recognize, like, as you're saying that, like, I can think about situations where I was like going through something in my personal life and how it impacted, the people that I was working with or leading. So I think that is
Yeah.
true. But I think that that is where it's tricky to know, like, what to do, because as a leader or even an employee or just a family member, it's like when you are going through those things, it's hard to be like, oh, but I still have to get this stuff done. Would
Yeah.
love to be able to just call in sick and lay in bed all day, or go for a long surf session or whatever it is that I need to fill my cup, but it doesn't always feel like
No, no. And I
possibility
think,
is there.
but again, here we're in the surfing metaphor, you cannot paddle out and have a great session every day. And I always say, as a leader of a team, I always say I fail differently every day or in a new way every day. Because it's just it's hard. It's about human relations and you can never be perfect because there's no way that it's possible. So just embrace also that you have flaws and you will upset people. It's even with the best of intentions. You have to be kind to others but also to yourself.
Yeah, and that is the message that we need to be sharing
Yeah.
to normalize.
Yes, 100%. And also, I wish in surfing, I still see girls on retreats that are very hard on themselves. And I always think you're making it so much harder for yourself because this is a very long journey. Once you figure it out, it's going to take a long time. So just try and have fun along the way. It's going to be easier for yourself and for everybody who's surfing with you too.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up. I was at a retreat this past week, and there was a woman on the retreat that was really hard on herself, and she was, struggling, and she'd go up and down. And then I heard from another of the participants how much it affected her. And I think I didn't really notice that in the moment. Like, I did notice that this woman was struggling, and I felt bad for her, and I was trying to, talk her through it and support her and validate her feelings and offer helpful tips and all of that. But I didn't realize what she was going through was also impacting
The
other people
others.
on the retreat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if like I'm generalizing, but I feel like we as women, especially in these like male dominated sports or whatever, like have this need to, both like be okay and also
Hmm.
like be awesome, like,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
like you want to be emotionally grounded and fine, but you also like
You
want
want to
to
fight for it.
you
Yeah.
want to fight for it, and the battle of that can be tricky.
Yeah, it's a careful balance, but I always let's come up with a new term. I'm gonna call it compassionate courage. Okay, so the wave comes, and I tell myself I'm gonna absolutely give it everything, and if I fuck up, then that's okay.
Yep.
But you have to commit to it. But you have to commit to it. You can't just pull back every time. But then if you cannot get better if you don't put yourself in a situation where you're gonna fail. But maybe do it within reason. Not
Right. Well, yeah, because that is the other thing. It's like you can't, if the waves are too big and you're too overwhelmed, you're not going to learn anything either. So
Yeah,
there has to be
no.
that, like, okay, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna practice in the whitewash, or I'm gonna sit on the shoulder or whatever, or I'm gonna not paddle out, whatever the situation is, but then be okay with that. Even though you're like, no, but I need to get better, and the only way I'm gonna get better is by going out in those big waves.
Yeah, but there is a difference between I don't know, an 8 foot and a 6 foot, and also what shape you're in and whatever. And but also, I think what really helps me, and that's why I love going with Surf with Amigas, is the group. Because I mean, I've had such good laughs in the water after a massive wipeout. Or I remember there was this one wipeout, and then I was one of the first to come back up, and I just looked around. It looked like a war zone because there was just this white foam, and here and there you could see hands coming up, grabbing for boards, and it looked hilarious. So, but of course, for that you need other people to share that moment with, and that's why it's good to be with other people in the water.
Yeah, I think so. My experiences back when I was a pro surfer and I had to surf bigger waves than I wanted to, and it was such a difference if I was going out with like the boys, or people that weren't afraid at all, versus going out with like a peer that like felt similar to me. And then when the giant wave was coming, it was suddenly like, oh my god, we're about to die, like in a humorous way. and then it
Yeah.
does. It makes and you come up and your hair's everywhere, and it makes such a big difference.
It does, and I remember Dee. She for 2 years ago, I remember in the water, she would always scream over to me, "We can do hard things. We can do hard things," and then we'd be eaten by the wave. But it's a shared experience, and you have to laugh about it because otherwise, it's never gonna be fun.
And I like the suggestions that you've offered around like choosing three things that you liked that happened. And, in that case, it could just be like, I liked that I survived that wipeout.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Nothing broke. I'm fine.
I like that I came up from the wipeout and saw all of my friends also wiped out.
Exactly. Exactly.
So what motivated you to actually take this knowledge and write a book about it? Or I actually don't know. You didn't actually say what the book was actually about.
This is my second one, but the first one is coming out in English this spring. The Future, a User's Guide. So it's actually basically a philosophical reflection on why human beings have this capacity to think about the future and what we do with it. So I think uh, I don't know how to put it in words, but it's like the book is in you. So I was telling my sister yesterday because she said, "Oh, I had an idea for a book, but then I kind of had other things to do." And I said to her, "When a book is ready, it's gonna come out." And so I have this slightly bonkers idea that basically a book is in you and it will come out when it wants to come out and then you have to write it. But it's actually not as simple as sitting down with a pen or a laptop and say, okay, now I'm going to write a book and then you're just going to write it. Like in your mind, there has to have be already an idea and of course the will that you're going to research whatever you don't know yet and that there's a story you want to tell. And then sometimes that's why it sounds like slightly spiritual. I feel like I didn't write this book. It just came through me. And so that book, The Future, the first one was just ready in me. When was this? During COVID, 5 years ago. And then Scenario I wrote last year. So this is like a choose your own adventure geopolitical book. I had the idea for that years ago, but then, last year, just my editor said, "How do you feel about writing this book?" And I thought, now the time is right. This is ready now. So I wish I could say you just have a good idea and then you sit down diligently, but I think there is a creative and I'm going to say almost spiritual process behind it that you can't really control. You just have to go with it.
The theory that the universe is consciousness and that we're just a part of consciousness, and that ideas are these existing things that
Yeah.
there's a time and they need to be put out into the world, and we're just portals for that idea. So like as you say that, I don't think at all that that's crazy because I've heard that before, and
I'm
it's an
I'm
interesting thing
glad
to
you're
think about.
saying that. But it's also, when the book is out, it doesn't feel like this is me. It feels like this is its own thing. It just traveled through me and now it's out there. And it will continue to be out there. And, already the books have their own existence because they've been read by people. Sometimes I see photos of on Instagram of people that are reading my book. And I feel like that's so interesting. My book has its own experience with this reader. I'm not in there. I am not part of this process. So there's definitely something a bit spiritual about this.
I love that. And how does it feel to have a best-selling book? Like, does that something that you expected, or is that just kind of a happy surprise, or did you know from the beginning that this is awesome and
So
I'm
again,
gonna
this
be
is gonna
successful?
sound like manifestation, but when I sat down and started writing, in my mind it was always gonna be a bestseller. And that's gonna sound super presumptuous. And I apologize, especially to those people who want to write bestsellers and it hasn't worked. In my case, it has worked, at least in Germany. And I don't know if that's because from the outset I decided I will write it like I think a bestseller is written in terms of it's super accessible. Both books are, they're not like super academic. I wanted them to be read by taxi drivers or nurses, somebody who doesn't necessarily study, but who's interested in these topics. But of course, then when it happens, it's a pretty crazy experience to imagine that so many people have read my thoughts without having met me. It's pretty weird, but it's great, of course.
Did you have to go and, like, do book tours and signing? I mean, I've talked to other
Yes,
people who have written books, and they're like, the writing of the book was one part of the labor, and then the promotion and
yes, the
marketing.
promotion interviews and tours and stuff. It's part of the deal. I kind of enjoy it, but I like writing better than doing a promotion. Yeah.
And as a writer, I mean, if we're talking about the spiritual thing, then there's like the robot can't do that, I don't believe. But
Yeah.
like, is that I think about the like, did you use ChatGPT to help you kind of write the book?
So the first book, ChatGPT, didn't exist at the time. Or probably it existed, but I had never heard of it in 2020. For the second book, I tried, so the second book scenario, it's a scenario, the subtitle is "The Future is at Stake." And my editor said, "Hey, do you want to write a book about the future of geopolitics?" And I said, I'm so tired of these, big books written by men that say the future is going to be this and this. The future is not written. It depends on what we're going to do with it. And so I wanted to write in the style of a choose your own adventure book, which is a children's book, right? And I told my editor, either I can write it this way or not at all. And luckily, they let themselves be blackmailed. They really liked the idea. But it's a creative idea, and we didn't know, will adults actually enjoy doing that? It turns out they do. So, but foolishly, I thought, surely ChatGPT can help me devise the paths, right? Because, for those who don't know, you have a scene and then it says, what are you going to do next? Are you going to go to Beijing or Moscow and then turn to page 22 or page 26 or whatever? And I thought there was going to be either a plan somewhere online or ChatGPT can write one for me. And it turns out it didn't. I tried, and then I had to do it old school with Post-its, and I really cursed it because there was plenty of dead ends that I hadn't realized, and it was like a mathematical endeavor. So I wanted ChatGPT to help me, but it couldn't.
Which, kind of makes me feel better about the whole thing.
Yeah.
That's the right answer. That's imagining the thing. So I guess one last question. Um, I feel like that there's a lot of in culture question mark, I guess, or in at least the circles that I run in, there's this pressure or suggestion. I don't know what the right language is, but there's this encouragement to focus on the present. It's like the past is gone and who
Mhm.
knows about the future. And like the only thing you know for sure you have is like right now. And so is that something that you identify with as somebody that focuses on the future? Or like, do you ever catch yourself thinking so much about the future for work or for whatever else or just philosophizing and think, wait a minute, I need to like pull
Yeah.
it back or how do you feel about that?
So it's an interesting paradox because I'm often asked exactly what you say. It was like, Florence, stop talking about the future. We live in the present. But first of all, the future is the present in that you're thinking about the future today. So it's by definition a product of here and now. And there's even studies that show that you think differently about the future, whether you're tired, which is obviously, the present, whether you, for instance, ate a cheeseburger. People that eat fast food, they're more impatient. They perceive time as passing slowly, for instance. It's super interesting. So whatever you're feeling in the present will have an impact on how you think about the future. And of course, it's in the present that you take action related to the future. So I always say it's actually more present than people realize. But the other thing is that human beings are future oriented beings. So we think about the future, I think 60%, no, 59 times a day. Of course, most of this is small future, like what am I going to have for dinner? What time is so and so coming over, etc. But we actually most of the time the future can make us happy. So when you think about in German there is a saying which is like anticipation is the greatest joy. When something's nice going to happen in the coming days or weeks, you're going to go surfing tomorrow. You're happy today, right now, about something nice that's going to happen. We are actually, studies show this, happier about a potential positive future than we are about something positive that already happened. So there is also great joy in the future. So it's okay to travel to the future. But of course, and that's the biggest trick, I think, for mental resilience, you have to be very good at coming back to the present. And that is absolutely my trick. Whenever, everything gets too much, be it, at work or private, I always think just whatever is right in front of me. I meditate every day. I think, it's here we're back at mental health. It's very important that you understand that future is like a playground. It's fun to travel there, but yeah, of course, you live here. Your body is here. You're first of all a body and a presence that's in this body.
Wow, I love that so much. I just want to like repeat it back so I make sure that I'm like understanding it. So the idea is that even though you're thinking about the future, your thoughts about the future are influenced or impacted by the experience that you're having in the present.
Yeah.
And that by thinking about the future and experiencing like positive feelings about the future, that you are having those positive feelings like in the present.
Yes.
And then if you get too caught up in thinking about the future, like maybe you're like thinking about negative possibilities in the future or kind of just getting lost in the future, then like checking in with, okay, right now I am sitting here and this is what I am feeling in this moment can be sort of the antidote to that.
Exactly. 100%.
About how like, yeah, if I have a trip I'm going on a trip, I'm going on a vacation with my family that is not at all work related, which is a very unusual thing for me. And I'm really looking forward to it. And I've been looking forward to it for a few weeks, and it's happening a week from today. And
Cool.
that once I am there, the reality of the vacation will probably not be as nice
Yeah, as what you're thinking
as
now.
my idealized version of how nice it's going to be. And so it's sort of nice that I no matter what happens when I'm actually on the vacation, I have had these like few weeks of like thinking
Exactly.
happily about it.
Exactly. Exactly. Got it all figured out.
I love it. Awesome. Well,
Great.
thank you so much. This has been super fun, and I feel like
Thank you, Holly.
I have some like good little nuggets that I'm going to be pondering. Thanks so much for listening to Second Breakfast, a podcast by Surf with Amigas. If you like what you heard, think of a surf friend who might like it too and send it their way. Give us a follow, rating, or a review on your favorite podcast platform to make sure you won't miss the next episode and help others find us. We are all about community, so please do keep in touch and let us know your thoughts and what you'd like to hear. Find us on Instagram or sign on to surfwithamigas.com for updates and inspiration to explore retreat dates and locations. While you're there, check out our blog and join our newsletter.